sweetest song. Seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone.
I'm reading from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda. Every week we read these commentaries, which are interpretations of the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Paramahansa Yogananda. And so one of the things our lines of the masters do is compare these two scriptures to show the underlying truth between both and the similarities. The title of this week is, Why Tell God Anything When He Knows Everything? Why Offer God Anything When He Has Everything? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teaching of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ teaches as the ideal prayer one that addresses very human demands to God. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Jesus himself said, just before suggesting this prayer, Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before you ask Him. Why then His recommendation that we pray for anything? The answer is that we should offer ourselves up in acceptance of His abundance. Don't pester God as though pulling constantly on His sleeve for His attention. Approach Him with confidence of a child in its parent. And in that spirit, then, ask lovingly, with complete trust, as though demanding your birthright, and without the slightest doubt in your mind that He wants only your best. For you don't have to persuade Him the way a beggar or a stranger might. You are His own child. God knows everything already. He knows what is in your heart. It is you who need to clarify your feelings, that you attune yourself to Him to tune in more clearly. But only by such clarity will you be able to receive perfectly what He gives you. For the same reason, we need to offer ourselves to Him, not because He needs anything from us, except, as Yogananda Ji said, our love, to complete His love for us, but because by self-giving, we expand our awareness from its confinement in the little ego outward to infinity. Those who partake of the nectar remaining after a sacrifice, says the Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter, attain to the infinite spirit. That person, however, who makes no sacrifices, never truly succeeds in enjoying even the blessings of this material world. How then could he attain happiness in subtler realms? Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, which is a book of prayer poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. Hello. Nice to see you. Demand to eject enemies of bad habits. Fierce foes and obstinate idle habits of restlessness have often entrenched themselves in the territory of my heart. Let me defeat them all, bent as they are on robbing me of my wealth of inner peace. Lead thou my forces of calmness victoriously, to the divine kingdom of fulfillment. It's so wonderful to hear Master's courageous words, his positivity, and yet his understanding also of the challenges that we face day to day. Similarly, it's described in the reading that Dharmini just read that the prayer that Jesus gave to his disciples and people generally was a very, very human needs. Give us this day our daily bread. And, or, give us this day our daily idli. I mean, you can change it so that it touches your heart. But then, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and so on. Now, that one in particular has to be understood, or actually can be understood on a much deeper level. Because you might think, of all the things, I mean, we have bread. Okay, then maybe he could have asked also for maybe some water, or a little bit of sambar, or, something to go with the bread. Why did after bread comes, forgive our debts? I mean, what if we have no debts? I mean, I keep my scene together, I have no debts, so why should I need to be forgiven of my debts? And then as we forgive our debtors, well, if we have debtors, I'd like to forgive them, and I forgive them in spirit, but I'd still like to collect. You see, it's not about money. It's not about exchange that way. On the deepest level, and this comes up again and again, that reference of debtors and debts is referring to karma. When we're talking about forgiving us our debts, you can say in a way that forgive us our karma. Because what is it to be given for a debt? To be forgiven of a debt. I have this debt that I'm supposed to pay back. I owe it. And if it's forgiven, then suddenly I don't owe it anymore. And even though I should have, or would have, or needed to have, pay it back, I don't have to suddenly. It's been forgiven. And it's the same way because with karma, that God, the Guru, and so on, grace can just remove our karma so that we don't have to pay it back. Now, it gets subtle because on a certain level, if we've put a karmic action out, and I mean any action we've put out is an energy that we've put out, which generates a karmic boomerang, you could say, that then returns to us. Once that boomerang is flung, it is going to come back. Nothing will stop it from coming back. But what is different is that if we are stronger than when we threw it out, or if we have learned the lessons that we needed to, that it was going to teach us, then its impact on us by the time it returns is much less. So in that way, you could say it has been forgiven. And so, similarly, if we love God, just the sheer protection of that love for God will also protect us from these blows. There's a beautiful saying Swamiji writes in Living Wisely, Living Well. This is in terms of forgiving others, which is of course equally related. Forgive others and the world itself will forgive you. And that's beautiful too, because you, by forgiving others if they've wronged you, or forgiving others even if they haven't done anything wrong, but somehow we're impatient with them, saying, never mind. Having that kindness, it generates an aura of protection around you. And even if you forgive someone and they still are mad at you, you can say you'll find the world responding in other ways because of that positive and kind energy that comes from you, and because of God's love for you and your acceptance of that love. He's loving everybody. And he's not loving. Master once had a vision of God where he said, I love everyone just as much as I love Jesus, just as much as I love Krishna. And Master repeated that to one of his own disciples who was feeling rather lesser. And he said, remember, God loves you just as much as he loves me, and Krishna and Jesus and so on. So it's not that he loves you more because you're following the rules, but it's more that you're able to receive more of that love. And therefore, he can give you more. So similarly, in terms of this concept of forgiveness and karma and so on, Jesus himself said, to he who loves much, much is forgiven. And that's in the same line. It's not just that if he loves much, then he loves even though he tripped over the carpet and spilled this thing all over, but he loves so we forgive him. No, it's not that. It's saying to he who loves much, that karma that comes back to him is much less. Swamiji, before I get into that story, this experience of being forgiven of a karma, Swamiji gives the example of saying that, suppose in a past life, I'm sure it must have been, in a fit of anger we punch someone on the chin. And he said, and that has generated this boomerang that is going to eventually come around and come back to our chin. But he said, in the meantime, if we become so strong and so on, then by the time that punch comes back on the chin, he said, we will say, oh, was that a feather that brushed by my chin? We won't even notice the impact of something that might have crushed us before. Now we see this in life if we go through enough hard lessons and learn our lessons from them. Then we feel, okay, something like this. I had this massive tragedy before that I stained my clothing right before I had to go out, and it was horrible. And then you go through enough tests and you find the stain on the clothing is not so bad. You can manage with it and so on. I had that experience actually at another center at Ananda Noida. We had a talk. We did like a satsang like this. Then we had some food, and then we had to do I think it was a discipleship class or something, level 3. And so in a moment of enthusiasm, I turned like this during the break, just as someone was trying to hand me something unbeknownst to me, and it was a complete dal chutney outfit that I was wearing after that. And there was all kinds of manjal, and it was beautifully yellow. It was white, the clothing I was wearing, so there was no kind of brush it off. It was just now manjal clothing. And so what could I do? I mean, I was embarrassed. I was calm. It was, it wasn't horrible. It wasn't their fault. It was my fault. I, did what I could and so on. But I had to walk around with this big stain. And so I said, okay, Divine Mother. Luckily, she was talking first, so I could meditate a little bit. So now what am I going to do about this? And why did it come? And I thought, well, of course it's come because I was careless. I mean, that's one thing. And but what can I do with it? Because I can't wash it off. Why did you give me this stain? And so then it occurred to me, because we were talking about discipleship, which has to do with our saying, I need help in getting free. I need help in getting more joy. That's really what discipleship is. That's its purpose. I want God, and I need help in returning to God. And so I looked at this and I said, I have this horrible stain on this clothing, but what's the big deal? I could be embarrassed. I could feel, I said this to the others, I could feel, foolish. But really, all I have to do is go home and put it in the washer and it comes out clean. It's not a terrible sin. It's not something that is even a part of me. It's just do a little sadhana, do a little kriya, do a little laundry, and finished. It's over. And so we have to remember that all the time, that inside our soul is pure, free, ready to be with God and wanting. And all we are doing is increasing our awareness, our willingness, and our eagerness to go in that direction. That's why we have to pray to God. Because as Swamiji asks the very logical question, why ask Him for anything why tell Him anything when He knows everything? It's not He who needs to hear it. And, it's not as if you say to God, God, by the way, I need some help with this, financial payment I have to make. And God says, Abriya. God knows about the financial payment. God knew about it before you did. God knows the end of the story. He knows how it's going to get resolved. So you're not getting his attention or filling him in on something, but it feels like that to us. It's not he who needs to hear it, it's we who need to say it. And furthermore, it's we who need to say it to him with openness, with trust, with belief that he is listening and that he cares. Because as it says in the reading, we are his own children. And so, why does that have to be said? In other words, why is that sometimes either a head scratcher? When I was new on the path, someone said, "Don't you know you are a child of God?" And I thought, I mean, certainly I could say, yes, I know because I have read it too. But that it wasn't necessarily something that I felt. And so why don't we feel that way? Or why didn't I feel that way? What is that? I think it's because things go wrong. Because we get hurt. Or because we want something and we didn't get it. At least speaking personally. Then suddenly that joyous freedom that a child has, and you can see if you go into, when you travel, you see very joyous, free 3-year-olds running around, places, and you go into restaurants and there's some child going, "Ah!" And you kind of, but everyone's indulging him because he's after all 3, and so he should get to do whatever he wants and so on. And so she's reminding me, because she thought I might try to slip by without telling you what I did when I was 3. I went to a restaurant. I had planned to confess, but now I definitely have to. There was a restaurant that my father took me to, and for some reason my mom was not free to look after me during his business meeting, and I think she was at work or something, and so he had to bring me along to meet with this client about something. And it was in this restaurant that had all these sort of booths around the entire wall, all the walls of the restaurant, and behind the booths there was basically a ledge that ran all along the, circumference of the restaurant. And I, of course, was, banging on the plastic and, because I was 3. And then I discovered this ledge. And so it was just wide enough for me to be able to climb onto. So I jumped onto the ledge and then ran all around all the walls of the restaurant with my little shoes, bang, 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 disturbing every single person in the restaurant. And of course my dad couldn't quite catch me, because then I would run back the other way, and so he couldn't get over the booth and so on. So of course I was feeling very free and very much a child of God. Or as P.G. Woodhouse said, just a bright young child of nature. Just a free soul and so on. And you see, so I'm getting little prompts here. And if you've ever had a group of children that are not your own, it's easier to see. Like if you've ever been a school teacher, or you've ever been the unlucky relative who has to watch all the little ones while everyone else has a nice peaceful time and so on. You'll know what I mean. Again, I was a school teacher for 7 years, so I've earned the right to say all these things. When you have little tiny kids, they're so cute, but they can be so infuriating also. And so there was one school teacher who was at Ananda Palo Alto she was really a saint among school teachers, and she was really the school teacher guru, in that any problem you posed to her about how to do something to handle a situation with a child, because children would put you in strange situations or ask you awkward questions, and you'd want to answer them truthfully, but you also, wouldn't, I don't want to go into all that, but you needed help. And she always had the perfect answer for everything. And so she said one of her teachers, though, had said when she was a teacher, when someone said, "Oh, look at these tiny little beautiful children, they're so sweet," the wise teacher said, "Yes, they're little cupcakes baked by the devil." But why are they like that? Why do we say that? Because they're just so free. No inhibitions, no boundaries, and I'm going to through the whole restaurant and run along the whole thing and so on. Another thing I did to my poor father during a meeting was gesture, which I guess I'm prone to doing when I was 3, and knocked, a huge glass of ice water all across the table and right into his lap. And my mom said she had never seen him move so quickly in his life. Just dumped all that water in the middle of, I'm sure, some refined situation that I was just adding my energy to it. So we see that in many young children, that carefreeness. And then it often goes away. And there's and it can come back. In fact, it has to come back. But part of that is because I think of hurts, and this didn't work out. And suddenly, hey, this amusement park or this pleasure garden that I was living in didn't give me what I wanted, or it even hurt me. Or it's that we become self-conscious. That's another thing. In children, that's more what happens. Once they reach about 7, 8, or 9, they start to realize people are looking at me and I care. And so that's when all this sort of, awkwardness starts to come in. It's interesting because in a way you also see the ego becomes stronger at that age. Because when children are very young, they don't necessarily have that sense of ego. I mean, they have the sense of I and mine and I want, but not so much that other people see me. And once they get older, suddenly it's, all this kind of thing. And so when you see that, and again, as a school teacher, or if you have kids of different ages in your life, you can kind of see that emerging. Then it's like, well, that's how our egos are too. Just suddenly, I don't want to appear lesser or anything. And so it's good to dress nicely and all that. I don't mean to speak against that, but just to say the awareness of what do people think about me? What are people going to do to me? How are they going to treat me? And so on. Now, going back to this whole thing about being hurt and then losing that sense. If I really were a child of God, then I wouldn't have been hurt. Or if God really loved me or really cared about me, then He would have given me this thing that I wanted. That's such a natural thought. And I think on one level, any crisis in faith, at least any doubts that I've had, all kind of boil down to, if God loved me, or if God was there, or if God cared, this thing wouldn't have happened that I didn't like. And so, I don't mean that therefore we have to mindlessly like everything, but it has helped me in my own self-reflection of, well, why didn't I like it? Why was I hurt by it? And so on. It's sort of a questioning and an opening of the heart. Or just to chant the path of Bhakti Yoga, chant, and then was I hurt? I don't even remember. I certainly feel joyful now. All of these things, though, I have to insert, can really only be accomplished deeply through meditation. I don't mean to say only meditation, but without meditation, we're just working on our mind with the mind. And sometimes it cooperates and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes we find a great insight. Gosh, that is it! Now all my doubts have been removed. And then tomorrow, what was that great insight again? It was something about God. You see? It just, our minds can't hang on to it necessarily. But so with the power of meditation, with the power of Kriya, for example, working through our karma, making us freer, putting us in tune constantly, returning back to center, that is, at least in my own life, when I saw permanent progress, if we can call it progress. I mean, I'm not saying how much progress, but inch by inch, gains started to come and I changed. And so, at the same time, it can't be done only through meditation. If we just meditate but we don't love God, then what are we meditating for? We were joking about that the other day with some friends, that I want to become a Jivan Mukta. Well, why is that? Because that's what one becomes. That's the cool club, the free souls. They're the ones who are really, they've succeeded. They've triumphed, so I want that. Because, it was like, what? So when you get it, someone gives you a Jivan Mukta necklace with a big medal that says, Jivan Mukta, and you get to walk around, and everyone goes, oh, yes. It's not a title, it's not an attainment, it's not some club, it's not you get to put on your resume after your name, Sharmila, Jivan Mukta. God bless you, I hope so. But the thing is, Jivan Mukta means free in God. It's God that we're going after. It's the more of God that comes to us. Swamiji finally gets exasperated with when his commentaries on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, not with Patanjali, but with the commentaries that are so often given, that this means that there is the union of the observer, the act of observing, and the object being observed. And Swamiji says, object, this is God we're talking about. The most relishable, as described in the scriptures. That which satisfies all our desires, brings us the greatest joy, the object. But you see, we can sometimes lose the point. And so again, I've mentioned this before, but we have these classes here, which for simplicity's sake of people understanding how they fit together in preparing for Kriya Yoga initiation, we call them level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and so on. And so, but by the end of level 4, we were saying recently to the students then, remember, the point of this class is not to get Kriya initiation. And even the point of Kriya initiation, to get the Kriya Yoga technique, is not to have the Kriya Yoga technique, or even to practice it. That's not the ultimate goal. The goal of even Kriya is to find God. That's the only reason why we should be doing anything. And we should keep that in mind in everything that we do. Is it bringing me closer to God or not? In fact, Swamiji gives that explanation of what is good and evil. Good is that which brings us towards God. I'll say good and bad. A good thing for us is what pushes us towards God. A bad thing is what pulls us away from God. So then can we say, for example, of suffering, which so often suffering is what drives us onto the spiritual path. Because until I was on suffering, I was having a good time. And someone said, well, why are you having a good time? And I said, who cares? I'm having a good time. Who needs to ask why? But then when we hit that wall, why? Now we suddenly are seeking more truth because we thought we had it figured out, at least I did, and then suddenly, brick wall. And so now I need to know more. And so once we have that suffering, do we say that suffering was bad? But if it drove us more towards God, it has to be good. I don't mean that it didn't hurt. I'm not trying to pretend that we don't have to heal ourselves. We do. It's very real. But we have to acknowledge that aren't we better off becoming deeper, asking questions, finding ways to open our hearts even under severe tests, rather than just kind of, as Sister Gyanamata said, being spiritual cream puffs. What would be the right thing to be here? Spiritual miser pox? No, I don't know. Something like that. Spiritual gulab jamuns, maybe. Just something with no substance. That's just like this, without having had that strength that develops through the fires of testing and purification. Now, we have to pray to God. We have to tell God these things. We have to offer Him these things because of what we become in the process. That's why we need to do it. And so all of the things we go through are so that we can become more free. And so even with the big hurts, they're helping us to become more free. Either because of freer in our understanding, or because we were hurt because something we were very attached to was taken from us and so on. Or just because of a misunderstanding. So often we can really be hurt because human love has been disappointed. Human love, whether it's in a relationship, human love because our families aren't treating us the way we would like to, or even unkindly by any court of law in the world, they would agree, no, it's not just you, this is unkind. Still, it's happening to us. That disappointment that can come from human love, and its denial or its betrayal or whatever, because we want love. As St. Augustine said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." There's something in us that seeks and craves that love. And so it's so easy and obvious to try to get it from other people. Much better to give it. But when it gets denied, that thought can even enter. Okay, I was hurt. There isn't love from this person, which means there isn't love. But there is. But it's inside. And it's in God. And very often the love you experience, suppose you have a good friendship, it's very thrilling, and then the person turns on you, and it's like, oh my gosh, there wasn't love there the whole time. There was. But some of the love you were enjoying was your own love. I mean, you were enjoying the love that you yourself were giving. And more than that, you were experiencing God's love that way. And so God will sometimes take these things away from us to remind us it's really from me. And I wouldn't have had to take it except you were becoming attached, or because you needed to learn this lesson, or you needed to go through it. Never to become wise and bitter. If we are bitter, we are not wise. Very simple. So all of this too, though, so it's not just theoretical, helps us tremendously when we accept into our hearts the Guru. Because we can pray and we can meditate and we can hope that God is guiding us, but as Master put it of his tribute to his own Guru, he said, "You were the spoken voice of silent God." It is the Guru who is the particular channel that God sends us of his own grace. And so clearly demonstrated in the Bible, Jesus even being described as the Son of God, helping all of those who came to him, as Krishna coming to Arjuna, and Arjuna saying, "Now that I've seen your divine form, it's a little scary because you just go back to being my cousin and friend that I'm used to interacting with." And Master did say that relationship with God is the highest friendship. But he, in terms of that sense of free exchange, but he himself recommended that we pray to the Divine Mother with openness and with trust. And so that God comes to us in the form of the Guru, just as a window into the infinite, and also as someone who can guide us particularly. Whether he's in the body or not doesn't really matter. But whether we're listening to him or not matters. Because he could be in the body and we could be not listening. And he could be out of the body and we could be listening. Swamiji said, "Master is closer to me now than ever before." At the end of his life, he said, "I don't know where Yogananda ends and Kriyananda begins." And Master said at Sister Gyanamata's funeral, one of his greatest disciples, he said, "My Master is much more with me now than before." And he said in Autobiography of a Yogi, "I would find his silent signature on my thoughts." His silent signature on my thoughts. Such a beautiful a way to express it. So we accept the Guru into our hearts and we listen, and he guides us in the particulars of what we need. Because we can be very clever in also tricking ourselves. And, again, I'm wise, I know. But really, then we miss the point. We need help. And again, as a disciple, as a serious student on the spiritual path, we want help. Many people can come onto the spiritual path, read some things, and then trade their student hat for a teacher hat. Now I will tell you all the things that I have read. It's like, well, okay, great. But, as Sri Yukteswar said, are you content to be a hollow Victrola, repeating the words of other men? And you can say words of other people, but it's like, what have we realized? He said again to that same pundit who was quoting all these things, he said, how have these truths renovated your own nature? How have they changed you? And so we have to be serious. But why? Because we want God. That's it. So we need that belief that we can find God. We have to believe that. And we could say, yes, no, again, no, I believe it, because, I've read it too. But no, we have to believe that we ourselves are worthy, and that it can happen, and that it can happen soon. So that's the belief. We also have to desire it. Because in overcoming all our desires, we don't want to overcome the desire for God. It's fine, come if you want, I am detached. That driving, yearning, thirst, hunger, and joy for saying, I want you. Please come. Or please bring me to you. But I want this. Desire, as Master said, plus energy is what is our willpower. Desire plus energy directed toward fulfillment. We've got to use that willpower. So the belief that we can get there, the desire to get there, and then of course all the actions that bring us there. Meditation, service, trust, loving God, and so on. But remember, God is in you and knows it all already. And the Guru too, as that channel of God, is in you and knows it all already. We need to tell him and then we need to listen. I had an experience of this when I met Swami Kriyananda for the first time and had a conversation with him. And these are all very small things. It's not as if he said, I am inside you, and so on. It was never his way. It was never Master's way. But it was only things that I realized later, because when I met him and had a sort of a half an hour interview with him, I was just in his aura. I was feeling so joyful. I wasn't self-conscious. I wasn't thinking, about this. I was just so fully enjoying that experience. And so he said one thing when I was asking about, he knew I was becoming a school teacher, and he said, of course you've read my book, Education for Life. And he went on, and I said, of course, because I had. And then later I thought, did he say it like, well, of course you've read my book, Ilya? He wasn't saying, you did, didn't you? He was saying, of course you've read it. It wasn't a question. I sort of heard it as a question, like, yes, of course I have. But he wasn't saying that. He was saying, of course you've read it. But then I thought, well, maybe he just figured, well, this guy's intellectual, which I was, and so if there's a book, he's going to read it. And so chances are he's going to read this book too. I wasn't sure. Then later, he said that when he was in college, he had sort of lost patience with college, and he went to he had a philosophy exam for a class that he never went to. So he sat down for this. He did go to the exam, and he sat down, and it said, "Please describe the philosophy of David Hume." And Swamiji read that and had never heard of David Hume before, but he knew because his name was David Hume, he must be an Englishman. So he said, I thought of the kind of philosophy an Englishman would come up with, and I got a pretty good mark on the paper. He said, I also threw in some quotes in French. And I burst out laughing. I exploded laughing because it had always been a little thing of mine that the snooty academic people would, when they were writing books and things, would always throw in quotes in French and not translating them. Because obviously anyone of any kind of mental caliber would know French. There's no need to furnish a translation for the weak-minded. It was always like that. Here's something in Latin. Ha 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 ha. You do know what it means? It was just so he did the same thing. He threw in some quotes in French. And again, it just touched that. And I loved that, to the point where later Swamiji's secretary Lakshman came out and said, you were laughing quite a lot. But I realized later, this thing about this untranslated quotes in French and so on, I never said that to anyone in my life. I never once said, and you know how people do with the French, I never expressed that thought. It was only something that I held inside. It wasn't a deep thought. And I never heard anyone else say it. And I also never heard Swamiji tell that story. And never say, I threw in some untranslated quotes in French. Ever again. But that was something that, again, resonated inside of me. And then finally, we were talking and I was saying that, I am sorry that I didn't get to live with Master, and I'm sorry that I haven't gotten to live more with you. And he had already established that I couldn't move into the house next door to his and just kind of be there, and as we would all love to do, but I had something I needed to do that he wanted me to do, even in Palo Alto, be a school teacher and so on. And he said, remember, Master said, don't be like the greedy man who looks at the platter and not at his plate. Master said there was a greedy boy in his school who just loved to eat food, and he was always doubling his food, but the boy was eating furiously, looking at the platter, worried about what he was going to miss, as Master put it. And Master said, you forget that I've doubled your food, that you're already getting more than you need, and yet you're worried about missing out on this other. So anyway, he said, Swamiji said to me, God gives you what you need, and when you need more, He'll give you more. And then he said, you know the story of the philosopher, the Avadhut, I think it's in Sanskrit, there's a whole Avadhut Gita, where he had 20 gurus, and one guru was, the sun. From the sun he learned this lesson, and from water he learned this lesson, and from a bangle that was on someone's wrist he learned another lesson, and it's this whole beautiful thing. And I said, yes, I've read that story, and okay, but I still would like to be with you. But yes, I hear what you're saying, and okay. And then it was years later that I realized that I never heard him tell that story again. I never heard him mention this. I mean, in all the recordings too that I listened to, and and he may have, but I never heard it ever again in the 20 years that followed. Because I just thought, yes, everyone knows that story, because I had just read that story just about a month before. And it had, you read a lot of things, but that had registered with me, that particular story. And yet that was the story that he referred to as if, well, obviously everyone knows this story. And I've mentioned it to other people, and they're saying, and a story? I mean, I'm sure some of you have heard of it, but still, I realized he was saying, I know you've read Education for Life. I know you think French quotes are funny. I know you've read this story about this philosopher because I'm inside you. That's how I know. And so everything that we need, trust the Guru, approach the Guru, and approach God with faith, saying, I know you're already here with me, keeping me safe, giving me love, giving me the guidance in this situation, and I know you want me just as much or more than I want you. God bless you.